Payment systems are one of the most important things you'll have in your apps, and it's very crucial to implement them the correct way. On this video, I will show you guys how to implement a payment system structure the correct way into your apps using Stripe. We are going to implement a payment system into a Flutter Shopping app using Firebase and GetX. Apart from the payment system, we have all of the basic features of a shopping app implemented into the application already. So if this is the first video you are watching on this playlist, feel free to go watch the two previous videos before this one, but please remember it's not mandatory for you to do so. You can just download the source code from the link in the description and start from there. But before we actually start coding, this video was made possible by Skillshare. Skillshare is this amazing online learning community where you can have classes on a multitude of topics. I've been using Skillshare a lot lately to learn about video editing and animation, but that's not all, because on Skillshare you can learn on a very wide range of topics such as photography, design, productivity, and so much more, even coding. For example, you can take this class on Flutter, which was, by the way, the very first one I took in my life. The good news doesn't even stop there, because the first 1,000 people to sign up using the link in the description will get free access to Skillshare Premium. And after that, you are going to pay only $10 for the annual subscription. By signing up to Skillshare using the link in the description, you'll be supporting the channel. So thank you very much in advance. If you have downloaded the video from the link in the description, or if you have been following the tutorial, this is what you have now in terms of the project, right? You can add products to cart, all of that, but you cannot pay yet. If you click on this button, nothing is going to happen. So now let's start to implement a working payment system into this project. Now, to start things off, you guys will need to have a Stripe account, which is very simple to do. Just go to stripe.com and create your account. After that is done, here inside of a dashboard, make sure the test mode is enabled. After that, you'll want to click on Developers, API Keys. Here we are going to need our publishable key and our secret key. Just remember this because we are going to use this data in the future. Now, to start things off here inside of our project, go to the models directory and create a new file called payments.dart. Inside of our payments.dart, we are going to create here our class payments model. And this again is going to be the structure of our payments collection inside of Firebase. First, we will need some constants containing the name of the fields of our collection. We need the ID, payment ID, card, amount, status. Again, card is going to be a list of elements, amount, the total amount paid, and the status of the payment, and the creation date. Now let's create some properties or some values. Again, if you see here, we have the ID, the payment ID, the ID of the document, the payment ID, the amount to be paid, the status of the payment, creation date, which is going to be an integer because we are going to use milliseconds. And here we have the list of cart items. Here we have our default constructor, and this is super helpful when we are working with GetX, because this is how we are going to initialize our payment model class. And then we need a named constructor, and basically here we are going to convert the data that we get from Firebase into a payment model. Now what we need to do is, basically we are taking all of the class properties or variables that we declare or define inside of this class, and we are assigning them the values that we are going to get from the database. This is everything you need to do to have your payments model done. Now guys, what we need to do is to actually build a screen, and this screen will be responsible for displaying the payment history. The first thing to do is to copy this library here called time ago. Open your pubspec file and paste that here. Now inside of the screens directory, we are going to create a new file. So we have here a new file called payments.dart, which is inside the payments folder. Now after we import Flutter material, we are going to create a stateless widget here. And call it payments screen. Good. Here we are going to need something else, which is a widget for this screen. And it's going to be called payment widget. Good, here we have it. Now let's create this widget, and we are going to use this widget. The payment widget is going to be used inside of the payment screen. So we may just start by building our payments widget here. We just finished building the payment widget UI, and you probably didn't understand a thing, which is natural, but be sure that when we start integrating this widget on, or when we use this widget inside of the app UI, you are going to understand everything that was done. Now what we have to do is the UI for the actual payment screen. The payment widget is going to be used inside of the payment screen. So I'll have to speed code a bit again, and let's do it. Let's build the payment screen. So now we just finished our payment screen. Super simple. Let's actually visualize what we have here, and I believe that that will make everything easier to understand. And to make that possible, it's fairly simple. Just go to the home screen, and in here, inside of our drawer, here is where we have our drawer. Let's copy this tile. So we are going to copy this and create a new one. But from here, the difference is that we want to open the payment screen. And here, instead of logout, we'll have payments or payment history. And we are going to change the icon as well. Okay, now let's test everything. So basically here we have our app, and let's try to open the screen we just created. Oops. And we have an error, which is very simple to fix actually. And the problem here is that here where we are requesting the length of the card items, we have no card items for our payment model yet, because we are hard coding the payment model. Everything here is hard coded, right? So some sections like this one, we are just going to comment them from now. So comment this column, and where we have items, we can hard code something like free. And let's try it again. Now, if we click here again and click on payments, we have something similar to this. Items, 3 items, 12 minutes ago. And so basically the widget we were creating is this widget here. And this is the payment screen, and this is the payment widget, right? So here is everything we need. This is what we have. The payment information here is hard coded here because we are passing inside of the payment screen. We are actually passing the payment widget and inserting the values manually. And here we have our payment model. We're inserting the price, the status, and the date manually. But what we want to do actually is to get all of this from the database and display that on the screen, right? We actually had to speed code the UI section because that's not the main focus of this project, and I didn't want to take a lot of time working with the UI. Right, with this out of the way, now let's start actually working with the back-end logic and how the payments are processed in this kind of apps, and make sure you understand. Now, let's start doing what's actually interesting to do, right? And the very first thing you guys will want to do is to import these packages here, Stripe payment and deal. Good. After having that out of the way, here inside of our user model, we need one method that it's going to convert the user properties into a map or JSON format. And it's a very simple method, just like this. We are taking every single element inside of the card list and we are converting that into another list of the type map by using to JSON method, right? And then what we want to do is go to the controllers and create a new file. We have this file here called payments controller. It's an empty file, but we are going to start writing code here. First, we are going to do a bunch of imports. Good. After we have imported a bunch of files, and you shouldn't have any type of problem, just import the same files I did import here. We are going to create our controller and we call it payments controller. The first property of our controller is going to be an instance of the payment controller. We have here our variable collection. It contains the name of the Firebase collection. Now here is where we have the big difference. When you create the URL variable here, you do not have to populate with this. You do not have to assign it to this URL, because this URL is the URL of my particular cloud function, and your URL is going to have a different cloud function. So you can just assign to this variable here an empty string, right? You don't have to copy all of this because you're not going to use it. After we have done everything here inside of our app, we are going to create a cloud function, a service function, a cloud service function using Firebase Cloud Functions, right? And from that cloud function, you're going to get the URL of the function and you're going to paste it here. For now, just assign the URL to an empty string. And then we have here our list of payment models. Let's override the onReady method so that we call this as soon as the payments controller is called. In here, we have this method here, Stripe payment. We want to set options that takes the parameters Stripe options. And in here, we're going to use our publishable key. And you remember at the beginning of the video that I showed you guys how to create a Stripe account, and from there you're going to get your publishable key. So you just have to copy your publishable key and paste it here. Again, remember, it has to be your publishable key and not the one you're seeing here on the screen. Another thing to add here is Android Pay Mode test. This is used when we are doing native payments. We are not going to do that on this specific video, but we can do that in future videos if you guys want to see that. Now we create a private method here called show payment failed alert, and basically here we are going to display a alert dialog when the payment fails. Since we are using GetX, it's very simple. You just have to call get.default dialog. Super simple. You don't have to pass the context or nothing like that. And the content of our dialog is going to be our custom text, and the text is payment failed, try another card. For the action buttons here, we are going to use a gesture detector that when it's tapped, it calls get.back, which is the same thing as doing navigator.pop. And as a child here, we have a padding widget. As a child of this widget, we have custom text, and the text says okay, right? Now here we have another method called add to collection. And what's going to happen here, this method will actually add all of the payment information to our Firebase collection. It takes two parameters, payment status and the payment ID. In here, we are going to generate a new ID, and this is the ID of the document. Remember that this is the ID of the document. And in here, we have Firebase Firestore collection doc.set, and this is how we set new documents into Firestore collections. And we are going to populate all of these values. The ID of the document is going to be equal to ID. The client ID is going to be equal to user controller user model value.id. Payment status is the payment status here, and the payment ID is the same thing. For the card, we are going to pass our user controller user model value.card items to JSON. We just created this method. The amount is going to be equal to card controller total price value to string has fixed 2, and this basically will create a limit of 2 decimal points to our number, our floating number. And we have here the creation date, which is equal to date time now microseconds. This should be milliseconds, actually milliseconds since epoch. Good. Now here we have another method called process payment as direct charge, and this is actually what's going to process our payment, right? It takes a payment method. The very first thing we are going to do here is to show the loading widget, right? The amount is going to be equal to, we are going to parse the total price, right? Because when we do total price value to string as fixed to, this is going to create a string, and we want to convert that string into a boolean, and then we want to multiply that by 100, because Stripe works with cents actually. So when you want to charge a single dollar to a customer, you would charge 100 cents. So that's why you multiply everything here by 100 and you convert it to an integer, because again, Stripe only takes integers, the Stripe API. Now we are going to call Dio here. Dio is a very good package to do HTTP requests, to perform HTTP requests. So here we are going to perform a post method, right? Inside of our post, we are supposed to pass the URL, and this URL takes some parameters: the amount to be charged, which is amount; the currency, I'm currently using USD; PM ID, this is basically payment method ID, where we are going to pass here the payment method ID. We are going to print now the code. You don't have to do this, but basically we'll let the developer know. It's going to display in the console that now we are decoding our response. And here we have a if statement. If our response.data is not null, or it's not error, or we do not have any type of error, we are going to do something here. In case we have, we are going to do something else here, right? In here we have our payment intent, right? And then we have the status of the payment intent. When here we are going to pass our payment method ID to our cloud function, right? And from our cloud function, we are going to create our payment intent using the payment method provided, right? The payment intent can be complete or successful when the card is actually charged, or it will fail if the card is not charged, right? If it's hard to understand, maybe it's going to be easier when we actually build our cloud function. So if the status of our payment intent is equal to succeeded, basically the card was charged, we are going to call here Stripe payment complete native pay request. And this is only useful when you are actually working with a native payment. But what's important here is that we have add to collection, right? Remember that we created this method that takes the status of the payment and the payment ID. And then here we have user controller update user data card is empty. After the payment is successful, we want to clear the user card. That's why we have this here. And then we're going to display a snack bar saying that the payment was successful. Else, if the payment is not successful, we don't want to do none of this. Basically, we just want to add that information to our collection, but the status of the payment is not going to be succeeded, will be something like failed, right? Now, if we have an error, right, or if the request data is null, we are going to cancel our native payment request, and we are going to display this method here, show payment failed alert. Now we have another method here called create payment method. Our Stripe account, we have to set this to null because we are going to deal with the creation of the Stripe account on the server side, if that's something we want to do. But what we can do here is we can add a card to our payment as our payment method here. So to get our payment method, we are going to call here stripe.payment_request with card form, and then we have to call card form payment request. And basically this is just going to display the Stripe dialog with the card form. Then, because it's an asynchronous method, if this is successful, we are going to return the payment method. If we have an error, we are just going to print the error. Now here we want to check something. If the payment method is not null, we are going to process the payment. So we're going to call process direct charge, and we're going to pass our payment method. If the payment method is null, we are going to show payment failed alert, right? And don't forget to call here dismiss loading widget. Now our last method here is get payment history, show loading, and we want to clear our payments list first before we add more items to it. So we're going to call here file store collection, where the client ID, right? Remember that we have this field inside of our payment collection. The client ID must be equal to the user ID. And basically this is the user controller user model value ID. We want to get this data, and then we want to do something with the snapshot. We have here snapshot.docs, which is basically the list of all of the documents. And we are going to run a for loop into that list. We have here our payment method is going to be equal to payment method from map. And then we want to add that payment method to our payments list. Then we have here logger. And this is basically the same thing as print, but logger is easier to see and somehow a best practice. We are going to log to display the length of the payments list. And now we are going to dismiss the loading widget. After this is done, we want to get to payment screen. So from the home screen, we are going to call this method get payment history. After everything is done, we are going to go to our payment screen. So this was basically it, actually. This was basically it. The final thing that we may want to do here is go back to our screens here where we have payment. Now, instead of doing this manually, we'll have to do this automatically. We have to get this data from the database. Now we have to do a couple things to make that possible. First, let's go to, you have to open constants and controllers. And in here, I want to declare payments controller is going to be equal to payments controller instance. Good. And now here inside of our main file, we'll need to have our payments controller as well. So we have to do get put payments controller. Good. Now we can go back to our payments controller. To our payments screen. And in here, we can remove this list here, because now we're going to do payments controller dot payments, right? Very simple, very clear. This is everything you need to do. And in here, inside of our payments widget, let's uncomment this line, because now we actually have cart items and we are going to display them here. Another thing here is, instead of having this number fixed, we'll have something like payment model cart length to string. So this is basically everything that we need to do, and we should be able to test this. Now, to test this out, we'll open our shopping screen, and in here, inside of our custom button, we can do something like payments controller, create payment method. And finally, here, instead of having this code here, we will do payments controller get payment history. Now, we did write a lot of code and we didn't test. Let's test things out, because it's never good to write this much code without testing. This is not going to work because we still have to create our cloud function, right? But let's see what happens, and afterwards we are going to create our cloud function. Now, as I told you guys, if you go ahead and run the app, it's going to run perfectly, but as soon as you insert your card details, it's going to fail because you do not have the cloud function in place, right? And if you don't know what a cloud function is, basically it's a function that runs on the server instead of running on your app. It runs on a Firebase server. And to be able to run such functions, you'll have to, first of all, enable cloud functions here. I already have that enabled on my project, but go to your Firebase project and make sure you enable that there, right? Now, the second thing that you have to know is that in order to build Firebase cloud functions, you have to have the Firebase CLI or Firebase SDK installed into your system. Now, how to install that depends on the system you're using, but I'll leave the link of this page in the description. And here you have a Firebase CLI reference. Even if you can check here the operating system that you're using. Even if you're using Linux, it doesn't matter. It can be Windows, Mac OS, Linux, any kind of operating system you may have. But an easier way is to watch this playlist here. It's a very good one to get you started with cloud functions, right? And it's going to take like 15 minutes to understand everything. But to make your life easier, I will give you a brief summary of Cloud Functions. First of all, to install the Firebase SDK, you have to install Node. You have to have Node, or you have to install npm, right? So you can have something like npm. Let me open a new window. You would need to have something like there. You have to write something like this: npm download, right? Sorry, Node.js download. So you would have to have Node, depending on the operating system that you're running. You'll have to select that and install Node, right? After you have Node installed, I already have that. You have to run this command here. Let me zoom in. You'll have to run this command here in your terminal. So open terminal or command prompt if you're on Windows, and run this command here to install the Firebase tools, right? And the last thing you will do actually after that is running this command here, Firebase login, so that you can log in into your Firebase account, right? After that is done, if you have logged in into your Firebase account, you would need to do something like this: Firebase init. First of all, create a directory where you want your cloud function to be stored, right? By doing this, this is going to be stored in the default root folder, and you may not want to do that. So for example, here I can ls, I guess I can change this to project, right? And in here you can write your cloud functions. First, you'll have to write Firebase init, right? And here you have to select, you have different services that Firebase provides, but you need to select the functions option. So just press space and then enter, right? Enter. And here we want to use this on an existing project, not a new one. So select enter. And for our case here, select the name of the Firebase project that you're using, right? And from that point onwards, you can just click next, and accept everything, right? I hope that was a good enough summary on how to get started. But after you have done all of that, you'll have something very, very similar to this, right? You can open your functions directory inside your cloud functions, open source, and go to OpenCRC src, and go to index.ts, which is TypeScript. And again, before I forget, the language that you want to select is TypeScript, not JavaScript. And you are going to have something very similar to this, right? Apart from this section here, because I manually added this here, but you're going to have something similar to this, right? Now here you are going to open your TS config, which is TypeScript config, and add this line here: no implicit any, which should be false, right? Perfect. After that is done, this line of code here is going to do something very nice. If you go to your Stripe account, use it in the test mode, API keys. In here, you'll have to select your secret key. My connection is super slow, but in here, you have to select your secret key, right? And after you've done that, you've selected your secret key, you have to change this section here with your actual secret key, right? And after that is done, you will use this line of code to set your Firebase variables here inside of the C of the terminal. So you'll do something like this: Firebase functions config set stripe test key equal to, and this is very good because if you publish your code to Git or anything like that, to GitHub or GitLab, or it doesn't matter, you will not have here your secret key, because you have to protect your secret keys, right? So it's not a very good practice to have your secret key public just like this, right? So it's easier for you to have this environment variable and then use that inside of the code, right? I already have that done, so I'll just delete this, and that's basically everything you will have to do. Now here, in terms of the code, I will just leave that comment here so that you guys can see how to do that. In terms of the code, the first thing you want to do is to add this line here, ESLint disable, right? And this is very nice because it's going to save you some time. And here we are basically disabling our ESLint here, the ESLint. And what that means is, for example, if you do not disable the ESLint, you'll have to format your code. You have to have the perfect structure in your code, right? The number of trailing lines, the space, and all of that. So to save you some time, just add this line here, ESLint disable, right? Now we're going to create our Stripe constant here, which is going to require Stripe functions config dot stripe test key, and we just said this, right? Now go back here and just do npm stripe, click on the link, and now what we are doing here is to install Stripe, or to add Stripe into your node packages. So you'll copy this line of code here, go back to your terminal, and just like that you'll add Stripe just like this. I already have Stripe, so I do not have to do that. Perfect. Now the name of our function here, and I don't want to go in very deep here because this is not a TypeScript or Cloud Functions tutorial. This is just something we have to do. But the name of our function here is create payment intent, and how we declare it is like this. You have exports dot create payment intent, and again, if you want to understand this in depth, watch the links in the description. You have here functions.http because this is a HTTP request function, right? On request, it's an asynchronous function that has two parameters, the request and the response, right? And in here, this is a Stripe method, and it's called stripe.payment_intent.create, and we use this to create a payment intent, right? And another parameter it takes is a callback function, and here we have this callback function here. We're going to explain that in a minute. The parameters of this method, the payment intent creation method, are amount, where we have rec, which is a request, dot query dot amount. And we use dot query because if you remember, inside of our Flutter app, in the URL, we are passing some values, right? And this is how we access those values. The amount, this is how we're going to access the currency, the payment method, and remember that we set the PM ID equal to the payment method ID. Confirmation method is automatic, confirm true, and the description of the charge, right? We didn't pass this, but you can add the description if you need to or want to, right? So in here, inside of our callback has two parameters here, the error or the payment intent. If the error is not null, basically everything is the way it was supposed to be. if the error is not null, it means that we have an error. Obviously, I'm sorry. So we want to console.log error payment intent. We want to console.log the error, and this is the same as printing the error inside of our Firebase console. And we want to return error as the response. So that's why we have here res.send error. Else, if the error is null, basically meaning that we have no error, we'll have here console.log created payment intent, and we are going to print here the payment intent, and we return JSON of our payment intent, right? So that's basically it, and this is the method. I know it was probably hard to understand because we would have to go deep into some concepts here, and that's not the goal. But basically, this is a very small function, and it's everything you need to do to make sure the payments are going to work, right? Now, to deploy your functions so that you can get the URL, you do something like this: Firebase deploy -- only functions colon, and we copy the function name, and remember, export doesn't count as the function name, and here you have the function name, and you run this code here, right? So after you have created your cloud function and you have deployed, you are going to see something like this, basically meaning that your function was successfully deployed. And if you go back to Firebase and click on functions, you can see here your function. What you have to do, or what you need here, is this URL here, right? And you copy this URL here, go back to your Flutter application, and here inside of URL, paste the URL you got from your function, right? And this is everything you need to do. I know this was a bit complex and complicated, but I hope you guys understood. And if you didn't, feel free to ask me any question in the comment section. Now, what we need to do is actually run this code and see it working. Our code, don't mind the mess here. These are actually the tutorial videos, but it doesn't matter. First, we are going to add some products. Okay, we have 3 products here. Now let's pay. It says the payment was successful. And if we go and check our payment history, here we have our last payment. The other ones are some payments I did previously, but here we have our application completely working. Thank you for watching this very long video. Hopefully see you guys on the next one. Bye.